The soft clinking of ice in a crystal glass is a delicate sound, a whisper of wealth. But the sharp, ugly crack of that same glass shattering against a marble floor, followed by the dark splash of vintage Bordeaux across a priceless cream silk dress, is a sound that can stop a room cold. It was a sound that made every head in Aurelia, the city's most exclusive dining sanctuary, turn as one. Catherine Lancaster, the private equity titan whose net worth eclipsed the GDP of several small nations, looked down at the crimson stain blooming across her chest like a grotesque flower. Her face, usually a mask of bored, aristocratic control, twisted into something venomous. "You incompetent little fool," she hissed, the words low and sharp enough to draw blood. "Look what you've done. Do you have any idea what this dress costs? It's more than you'll make in a decade." The young waitress, Elena Ward, didn't flinch. She didn't burst into tears or stammer apologies as the restaurant's manager, Harvey Dawson, began to scurry towards them, his face the color of spoiled milk. Instead, Eleanor's clear, grey eyes met the billionaire's gaze. A strange calm settled over her features. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a statement, as cool and clean as the polished silver on the table. "Madam, don't dare me." Catherine Lancaster thought she was just a waitress. She was about to learn, in the most public and financially catastrophic way possible, how devastatingly wrong she was. The price of that lesson wouldn't just be her reputation, it would be the crown jewel of her empire. Aurelia was not merely a place to eat, it was a testament to the unbreachable fortress of old money. Tucked away behind an unmarked bronze door on a quiet, tree-lined street, it operated on a system of patronage and legacy. You couldn't book a table online. Your grandfather had to have booked one. The light that filtered through the vaulted conservatory ceiling was natural, soft and unforgiving, illuminating the quiet confidence of its clientele and the subtle anxieties of those who didn't belong. The air smelled of beeswax, freesia, and the faint metallic scent of power. In this gilded terrarium, Elena Ward was an anomaly. At 25, she possessed a stillness that was unusual for her age. While the other staff members, aspiring actors and artists, buzzed with a restless energy, Elena moved with a quiet, deliberate economy. Her uniform, a simple charcoal grey shift dress and a starched white apron, was always immaculate. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that highlighted the intelligent watchfulness in her eyes. Harvey Dawson, a man perpetually on the verge of a panic attack, considered Elena his anchor. "Elena, table 4, he'd murmured during the pre-service briefing. "The Pendletons. They've asked for you." They always did. The quiet judges, the retired ambassadors, the old guard families who valued discretion above all else. They all preferred Elena. She had a preternatural gift for anticipation, refilling a water glass before a throat was cleared, appearing with the check the moment a conversation concluded. She was a ghost in a grey dress, visible only when needed. But tonight, the ghost was on a collision course with a predator. "Attention, everyone," Harvey had announced earlier, his voice tight. "Catherine Lancaster has the Gardenia suite at 8, her party of 3. This is a code red. I want absolute, flawless perfection." A collective intake of breath swept through the staff. Catherine Lancaster. Even the kitchen porters knew the name. She was the Viper of Vanguard, a vulture capitalist who didn't acquire companies so much as perform autopsies on them, selling off the valuable organs and leaving the carcass for the employees to bury. She was infamous for her cruelty, her impossible standards, and her habit of destroying careers over a lukewarm consommé. She's bringing her lead counsel, Sterling, and her new VP of acquisitions, Amelia Vance, Harvey continued, his gaze landing on Eleanor. She has requested, and I quote, "service that is silent, intuitive, and invisible." Eleanor, that means you. Eleanor had simply given a sharp, single nod. Understood, Harvey. The Gardenia suite. A younger waiter, a fresh-faced art student named Ben, had caught her arm as Harvey bustled away. "Be careful, Elena. My aunt was a senior executive at a company she took over. Lancaster fired her via a 2-sentence email on Christmas Eve. She's not just ruthless, she enjoys it." Elena had offered a small, unreadable smile. "She can't be worse than the senator's wife, who claimed our still water was too aggressive." "No, this is different," Ben had insisted, his expression serious. "She looks at people like us, people who work with their hands, like we're insects, like we're just part of the scenery." "Then I'll be the most impeccable piece of scenery she's ever ignored," Elena had replied, her voice placid. But as she polished the already gleaming silverware in the Gardenia suite, her focus was sharper than usual. Catherine Lancaster. The name was a stone in her gut. She hadn't sought this confrontation, but for months she had been preparing for it. This wasn't just another shift. This was the culmination of a promise made long ago in a quiet, dusty room that smelled of old books and grief. Tonight, it seemed, the reason she had taken this job in the first place was about to walk right through the door. When Catherine Lancaster swept into Aurelia, the hushed reverence of the room curdled into a palpable tension. She didn't enter. She conquered. She was a tall, angular woman in her late 60s, her silver hair styled in a severe, architectural bob. Her cream silk dress was a statement of minimalist wealth, accented only by a single, gargantuan emerald necklace that shimmered with cold fire. She was flanked by her 2 associates. Mr. Sterling was a bloodless man with the permanently pursed lips of a lawyer who bills in 6-minute increments. The other, Amelia Vance, was a young woman in her early 30s, her face a carefully constructed mask of ambition and anxiety. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest like a prayer book. "Lancaster, party of 3, Catherine announced to the maitre d', not looking at him, her gaze already sweeping the room, assessing and dismissing every other patron. "Of course, Madame Lancaster. Right this way. Your suite is prepared." Elena watched them approach her station. She saw the subtle nods from other diners, nods that Catherine ignored, as if they were beneath her notice. She was the sun, and everyone else was simply a satellite. "Good evening," Elena said, her voice a model of professional warmth as they settled into the plush banquettes of the private suite. "My name is Elena. I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with something from our cellar? We have a particularly fine Chateau Margaux, 1982. Catherine cut her off with an impatient flick of her wrist. "Don't try to impress me with the obvious, girl. I know the wine list better than you do. Bring a bottle of the Screaming Eagle. And mineral water? San Pellegrino. With 1 slice of lime, cut to a 1/4-inch thickness. No thicker, no thinner. Now, go." She hadn't made eye contact. She was already spreading documents across the white linen tablecloth, her attention fixed on the business at hand. "The deal is sealed, gentlemen, and Amelia," Catherine began, her voice a low, confident purr. "We activate the acquisition of Blackwood & Sons at market open on Monday. It's a classic pincer movement. The tender offer is irresistible, and we already have a shadow majority through proxies." Sterling, the lawyer, offered a sycophantic smile. "A masterpiece of strategy, Catherine. They're an old-fashioned furniture company. Family-run. They'll be too sentimental to even understand what's happening until we're liquidating the inventory. Amelia Vance shifted uncomfortably. But Madame Lancaster, their craftsmanship. Blackwood has been a benchmark for American-made quality for over a century. Their artisans are masters. Couldn't we preserve that part of the business? Catherine's eyes, the colour of chips of ice, settled on the younger woman. The temperature in the suite seemed to drop 10 degrees. Amelia, you are young. You are brilliant. Do not disappoint me by becoming sentimental. Craftsmanship is a liability. It's slow. It's expensive. We are not buying a legacy. We are buying assets. Prime real estate in North Carolina, a portfolio of aged hardwoods worth a fortune, and most importantly, a pension fund that is criminally overfunded. We absorb the pension surplus to offset the acquisition cost, Catherine continued, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a spreadsheet. Then we sell the brand name to a mass-market manufacturer in Asia, auction the timber, and develop the land into luxury condos. It's not just profitable, it's elegant. Amelia paled. The pension fund. That's for their employees. Some of those men have worked there their entire lives. They were promised nothing that my lawyers can't reinterpret, Catherine snapped. They are line items on a balance sheet, Amelia, not people. Understand the difference, or you will find yourself back in a public defender's office. Are we clear? Yes, Madame Lancaster, Amelia whispered, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Elena returned with the wine and water, her movements silent and fluid. She presented the bottle of Screaming Eagle to Catherine, who waved it away without a glance. Just open it. As Eleanor poured the water, her hand steady as a surgeon's, she saw the tremor in Amelia Vance's hand as the young woman reached for her glass. She saw the flicker of something, shame, fear, self-loathing, in her eyes before it was quickly extinguished. Elena felt a familiar, cold anger solidify in her chest. She had seen predators like Catherine Lancaster her entire life. But this was different. This was personal. She retreated to a discreet corner of the suite, her mind a whirlwind. Blackwood and Sons. The name echoed down the corridors of her memory, smelling of sawdust and lemon oil. A family-run furniture company from North Carolina. A company her own grandfather, a quiet, dignified carpenter, had worked for as a young man. A company founded by the family of his dearest friend. A company whose pension he had always spoken of with pride, as a promise kept. The dinner was an exercise in calculated cruelty. Catherine dissected Amelia's every suggestion, mocked Sterling's cautious legal advice, and sent back her lobster bisque because it was, she claimed, a degree too tepid. She treated them not as colleagues, but as subjects. The beauty of the plan is in the legal architecture, Sterling was saying, trying to regain favor. We're using a newly formed subsidiary, Phoenix Legacy Holdings, to execute the asset transfer. It creates a firewall. By the time the pension board can file an injunction, the assets will be gone, legally transferred to an offshore entity. It feels dishonest, Amelia murmured, almost to herself. Catherine slammed her fork down, the sharp sound making both her associates jump. Dishonest? It's capitalism, you naive child. It's finding the weaknesses in the system and exploiting them for maximum gain. The system is a game. The rules are for the people who lose. We write the rules. Elena stood by the service station, notepad in hand, waiting to take their dessert order. Are you ready to order, madam? Catherine finally looked up, her eyes focusing on Eleanor for the first time. It was clear she didn't see a person. She saw an interruption. We are finished, she declared, though Amelia's main course was barely touched. Bring the check. She made a grand, dismissive gesture with her hand, a flick of the wrist to wave Elena away like a fly. And it was this gesture, so small, so thoughtless, so utterly contemptuous, that sealed her fate. Her hand, heavy with platinum rings, connected squarely with Eleanor's arm as she held the half-full bottle of red wine, preparing to top off Mr. Sterling's glass. It was an accident, born of pure arrogance. The bottle lurched. The deep, dark Bordeaux arced through the air. It wasn't a spill, it was a deluge. It splashed directly onto the center of Catherine Lancaster's chest, the crimson liquid soaking into the cream silk, cascading down her front, and dripping onto the pristine white tablecloth in a sickening pool. The suite fell into a silence so profound it was like the pressure drop before a hurricane. Sterling looked as if he had witnessed an assassination. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Catherine looked down at the ruin of her dress. She then looked up at Eleanor, her face a kabuki mask of incandescent rage. She stood slowly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You clumsy, worthless fool," she hissed. "I want you fired. I want you blacklisted from every reputable establishment in this city. You will be serving greasy slop in a roadside diner by next week. Harvey!" she shrieked, her voice echoing into the main dining room. "Get in here and deal with your incompetent staff." Harvey Dawson came running, his face ashen. "Madam Lancaster, I am so profoundly sorry. Please, this is a terrible, terrible accident. Elena, apologize. Apologize to Madam Lancaster this instant." This was the moment. The entire restaurant was watching, holding its breath. They expected tears. They expected groveling. Elena simply placed the wine bottle back on the service table with a soft, deliberate click. She looked at a terrified Harvey. She looked at a guilt-ridden Amelia. Then her gaze settled on Catherine Lancaster, a gaze as direct and unyielding as a surveyor's laser. Her voice was not loud. It was not emotional. It was a clear, cold bell ringing in the sudden silence. "Madam, don't dare me." Catherine Lancaster stared, momentarily confused, as if her ears were malfunctioning. "What? What did you just say to me?" she snarled, taking a step closer, towering over the waitress. Harvey rushed forward, his hands fluttering nervously. "Please, madam. She's in shock. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I said," Elena repeated, her voice cutting through Harvey's panicked babble, "don't dare me." A strange, ugly smile spread across Catherine's face. The rage was replaced by a chilling amusement. "Don't dare you? Don't dare you to do what, exactly? Beg for your job? What could a little nothing like you possibly do to me?" And that was when Eleanor detonated the first bomb. "I could, for example," Elena said, her voice still perfectly level, "inform the North Carolina Attorney General that Phoenix Legacy Holdings is a fraudulent shell corporation established 6 weeks ago with the sole intent of illegally seizing control of the Blackwood and Sons pension fund." The smile vanished from Catherine Lancaster's face. It was as if she'd been struck. Sterling, the lawyer, took an involuntary step back. "What? What did you say?" Catherine whispered. "Phoenix Legacy Holdings," Elena repeated, her eyes like chips of granite. "Your elegant legal architecture. It's a trap, Madam Lancaster, and I'm not the one who is about to walk into it." Sterling found his voice, sputtering. "This is outrageous! She's insane! She's just repeating words she overheard. Harvey, call security this instant. Have this woman removed." "Am I?" Elena's gaze shifted to the lawyer, and for the first time, Sterling saw something in the waitress's eyes that made his blood run cold. It was not defiance. It was a profound and terrifying certainty. She turned back to Catherine. "You believe your offshore transfer creates a firewall. It doesn't. You're using a loophole in the ERISA Act of 1974, assuming it hasn't been updated to account for modern digital asset transfers. You assumed wrong. Catherine was no longer breathing. She was staring at Elena, her mind, a machine of cold calculation, desperately trying to compute this impossible variable. How could a waitress know about ERISA? Here's the problem, Madam Lancaster, Elena continued, her tone now that of a lecturer explaining a complex theorem to a struggling student. The Strengthening Protections for Retirees Act was signed into law last year. It's an obscure piece of legislation, easily missed if your legal team is overconfident. Section 2, paragraph C, specifically designates the type of rapid asset transfer you're planning as a presumptive act of criminal fraud if it involves a pension fund over 50 years old. It triggers an automatic, non-negotiable freeze of all assets belonging to the acquiring entity, your entity, Phoenix Legacy Holdings. The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the ambient clatter from the main dining room seemed to have ceased. Sterling, his face white, was frantically tapping at his phone. That legislation was tied up in committee. It never passed. It passed, Elena stated flatly. It was attached as a rider to a popular veterans' benefits bill. It sailed through. Your team missed it because they, like you, believe the rules are only for other people. You aren't a viper, Madam Lancaster. You're a dinosaur, about to be extinguished by an asteroid you never saw coming. The blood had drained from Catherine's face, leaving behind a waxy, sallow pallor. Her eyes darted to Sterling, a silent, desperate plea for denial. Is this true? Is she— I don't know, Sterling stammered, his fingers trembling. I'd have to verify. Let me help you, Elena said, driving the final nail into the coffin. The moment that transfer is initiated on Monday morning, it won't just be frozen. It will trigger a multi-agency investigation. The SEC, the Department of Labor, and because you're targeting a company with significant historical value, even the FBI's art crime team, which also handles cultural property. You won't just lose the deal. Your personal assets will be frozen pending the investigation. You won't just be disgraced, Madam Lancaster. You'll be destitute. She let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly weighted stone dropping into a silent pool. Who are you? Catherine whispered. The question was not a demand. It was a plea from a woman standing on a gallows she hadn't realized was being built around her. Elena allowed herself the smallest, most devastating of smiles. Me? I'm just the incompetent little fool. The scenery. The insect. She reached into the pocket of her apron, but she didn't pull out a notepad. She pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook and a simple, crisp business card. She didn't hand them to Catherine. She placed them on the table, right next to the spreading pool of red wine. You're correct about one thing, she said, her eyes meeting Catherine's one last time. I am fired. She looked at Harvey, who was staring at her as if she had sprouted wings. My apologies for the mess, Harvey. It was unavoidable. She untied her apron, folded it with practiced precision, and placed it on the table next to the card. Then, without a single backward glance, Elena Ward walked out of the Gardenia suite, her back ramrod straight, leaving Catherine Lancaster to stare at the ruins of her dinner, her dress, and her perfectly architected world. Amelia Vance, her hand still over her mouth, was the first to move. Her eyes fell to the business card on the table. The embossed lettering was simple, elegant, and black. It didn't say, Elena Ward, waitress. It read, Eleanor Vance, investigative journalist, The Sentinel Post. Sterling made a choking sound. The Sentinel Post. Not some local paper, but the most feared, Pulitzer-winning investigative unit in the country. He looked from the card to the small leather notebook, its pages filled with a dense, meticulous shorthand. It was a reporter's notebook. They hadn't been served dinner. They had been under surveillance. Catherine slowly, unsteadily, sank back into her chair. Her empire wasn't just threatened, it was compromised. She hadn't been outmaneuvered by a rival. She had been publicly executed by a waitress holding a wine bottle, and she had handed her the weapon herself. The wine stain on her dress no longer looked like a flower. It looked like a fatal wound. Outside, in the cool evening air, Eleanor, leaned against the brick wall of the alley behind Aurelia. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the adrenaline of the past hour finally beginning to recede, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The calm, icy demeanor she had worn like armor dissolved, and for a moment she was just a 25-year-old woman who had just taken on a dragon. A quiet cough broke the silence. She looked up to see a man standing at the end of the alley, partially cloaked in shadow. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and a kind, weary face. He held a cane of polished oak, but leaned on it more out of habit than necessity. She recognized him instantly. Arthur Pendleton. Table 4, one of Aurelia's oldest and most respected patrons. He had been dining alone, as he often did, at a table with a clear view of the gardenia suite. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever witnessed in my 82 years, young lady, he said, his voice a gentle, cultured baritone. He took a few steps closer, his eyes, though faded with age, missing nothing. I am assuming, given the outcome, it was the former. Eleanor straightened up, her professional mask slipping back into place. Mr. Pendleton, I hope our disturbance didn't ruin your dinner. He gave a dry chuckle. On the contrary, it was the most riveting piece of theatre I've seen since Olivier played Lear. Tell me, Miss Vance, was all of that true? About the legislation? The FBI? Every word, she confirmed. Catherine Lancaster's legal team is arrogant. They look for loopholes in major, well-known laws. They never think to check the fine print on the small ones. Extraordinary, he murmured, tapping his cane softly on the cobblestones. I confess, I've watched you work for months. I thought you were simply the most competent waitress in a city that has forgotten the meaning of the word. It seems I dramatically underestimated you. Most people do, Eleanor said. It's the most effective tool I have. Indeed. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. Catherine Lancaster will not take this lying down. She has been publicly humiliated. A woman like that doesn't just retreat, she retaliates. She will bring the full weight of her resources to bear against you. She will try to ruin you, to discredit you, to bury you. I'm aware of the risk, Eleanor said, though a cold knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. Pendleton was right. This was far from over. A single journalist, even one from a paper as prestigious as the Sentinel, is still just one person, Pendleton continued. Lancaster owns politicians. She has judges on her payroll. She can tie you up in frivolous lawsuits until you and your paper are bankrupt. She fights wars of attrition. He took another step closer, his expression serious. You cannot fight her alone. You need allies. You need a different kind of power. The quiet kind. Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw not just a wealthy old man, but a figure of immense, understated influence. Arthur Pendleton was old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. His family had helped build this city. His name was carved onto the cornerstones of museums and university libraries. He represented the establishment that Catherine Lancaster with her new money ruthlessness so openly despised. "With all due respect, Mr. Pendleton, why would you help me?" she asked, her voice laced with the cautious skepticism of her profession. "This isn't your fight." A sad, knowing smile touched his lips. "My dear girl, I have sat at that table for 50 years and watched the world I knew be devoured by people like Catherine Lancaster. I've watched them tear down landmarks for glass towers, gut honorable companies for parts, and replace integrity with leverage. I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business. I became a relic, a spectator." He looked directly into her eyes, and she saw a flicker of the power he must have once wielded. "Tonight, I watched you stand up to a bully. You reminded me that one person, armed with the truth and sufficient courage, can still stop a monster in its tracks. It has been a long time since I felt anything other than quiet despair for the future. You have given me a spark of hope, and for that, I am in your debt." He reached into the pocket of his tweed jacket and produced a simple, heavy cardstock card. It held only a name and a private telephone number. "Catherine Lancaster plays a very dirty game. It is time someone reminded her that others know the rules as well. Call me tomorrow. I believe I may have some old friends on the board of the bank that finances her acquisitions. Perhaps they would be interested to learn about the elevated risk profile of their star client." He gave her a small, formal bow. "Miss Vance, it was an honor to witness your work this evening." And with that, he turned and walked away, the tap-tap-tap of his cane echoing down the alley, leaving Eleanor standing in the darkness, holding a new, unexpected key in her hand. The battle was not over, but she was no longer fighting it alone. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated escalation. As Arthur Pendleton had predicted, Catherine Lancaster's response was swift and brutal. The first salvo was a call from the Sentinel's editor-in-chief, a man Eleanor had respected, now sounding flustered and apologetic. "Eleanor, the paper's lawyers are concerned," he'd said, the strain evident in his voice. "We've just received a cease and desist letter from Lancaster's legal team. They're threatening a $500 million defamation suit." "The story is solid, Frank. Every fact is triple-sourced," Eleanor had replied calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I know, but they're also calling in favors. One of our biggest the hours that followed were not a blur. They were a series of hyper-focused, crystalline moments, each sharp enough to cut. The walk from Aurelia's service alley back to her small, fourth-floor walk-up was the longest of Eleanor's life. She did not take a cab. She needed the cold night air, the anonymity of the crowded sidewalks, to stitch the persona of Elena the waitress away and resurrect the far more vulnerable reality of Eleanor Vance, the woman who had just declared war on a demigod. The familiar streetlights of her neighborhood seemed accusatory, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. Every rustle of leaves in a sidewalk tree planter was a footstep behind her. The reflection of a passing car in a storefront window was, for a terrifying split second, the sleek black town car that was Catherine Lancaster's signature. She felt a cold dread coiling in her gut, a primal fear entirely separate from the calculated adrenaline of the confrontation. In the restaurant, she had been in control, the architect of a beautiful, intricate trap. Out here, she was just a woman with a thin coat and a set of keys, and the monster was loose. She let herself into her apartment, locking the deadbolt and sliding the chain into place with a trembling hand. The silence of the small space was immense. It was a space defined by her investigation, stacks of financial reports on the coffee table, a corkboard covered in a spiderweb of names and connections, a worn copy of the ERISA Act of 1974 bristling with coloured tabs. For a year, this room had been her fortress. Tonight, it felt like a cage. She had thrown her stone at the giant. Now she could only wait for the mountain to fall on top of her. Her phone rang, the shrill sound violating the silence. The caller ID read, Frank Miller, editor. She took a breath, composing herself, and answered. Frank. Eleanor, what the hell have you done? His voice was a choked whisper, a mix of awe and sheer terror. My phone has been ringing off the hook for the last hour. Someone from Aurelia's management, a dozen patrons who recognized you, and... Eleanor, I just got off the phone with Theron Croft. Theron Croft, the senior partner at the most powerful law firm in the city, Catherine Lancaster's personal bulldog. He informed me, Frank continued, his voice tight, that if we run a single word of your story, they will file a $500 million suit for defamation, tortious interference, and corporate espionage. They're claiming you obtained your information under false pretenses. Which I did, Eleanor stated flatly. It's called undercover journalism, Frank. We've done it before. Not against her. Eleanor, she's not some city councilman taking bribes. She's a founding member of the consortium that owns half the luxury brands that advertise with us. She sits on the board of the museum our publisher's wife chairs. She doesn't just have money, she has tentacles. Eleanor felt the walls of her fortress begin to crack. The story is ironclad, Frank. Every fact is triple-sourced. The legal analysis is sound. You know that. Facts don't matter when you're fighting a war of attrition. She'll bury us in discovery motions and preliminary injunctions. The board is already panicking. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They want me to kill it, pull the story, put you on administrative leave, and issue a public apology. The word apology landed like a physical blow. You can't, Frank. This is bigger than her. It's about the Blackwood employees. It's about the 7 other companies she's gutted. I know, he said, and the exhaustion in his voice was profound. But the board doesn't see employees in North Carolina. They see a $500 million liability and a full-page ad from Cartier that might not be there next month. He sighed, a sound of utter defeat. I'll try to hold them off. Buy you some time. But Eleanor, be careful. This is out of the newsroom now. This is in the street. She hung up, the silence of the room returning, now heavier, suffocating. He was right. The first wave of the counterattack hadn't been a frontal assault. It was an attack on her foundations, on the very institution that gave her a voice. Lancaster wasn't trying to disprove the story. She was trying to ensure it would never be heard. A soft click on the landline phone in her kitchen drew her attention. She picked it up. There was no dial tone, only a faint, hollow static. They were already listening. She looked out her window, down to the street 4 stories below. A black sedan was parked across the road, its engine off, its windows tinted. It wasn't there an hour ago. The mountain was beginning to move. Inside the Blacktown car, the silence was of a different sort. It was not the silence of fear, but of compressed, volcanic rage. Catherine Lancaster sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, the ruin of her cream silk dress a testament to her humiliation. The wine had dried to a dark, ugly map of her defeat. She had not spoken a word since leaving the restaurant, had not even acknowledged Sterling, her lawyer, who sat opposite her, sweating through his suit despite the car's frigid air conditioning. When the car purred to a stop in the private, heated garage beneath her penthouse, she finally spoke, her voice a low, terrifyingly calm whisper. "Get out, Sterling." "Catherine, we need to formulate a response. I've already drafted a statement." "Did I ask for a statement?" she hissed, turning her head to fix him with a gaze of pure venom. "I gave you an instruction. Get out." He scrambled out of the car, practically falling onto the polished concrete floor. The door clicked shut, and the car ascended in a silent elevator directly into her apartment. Her penthouse was a monument to minimalist power. It was all glass, steel, and white marble, a cold, sterile space that offered a god's-eye view of the city below. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the glittering expanse, the millions of lives scurrying below like insects. One of them, one single, insignificant insect, had managed to bite her. "Find her," she said to the empty room. She knew her head of security was listening through the car's comms system. "I don't mean her name and address. I mean everything. Every school she attended, every person she's ever dated, every late credit card payment, every embarrassing photo from her university days. I want to know who her parents are. I want to know where they're buried. I want a complete psychological and financial autopsy. I want to know what she loves, so I can take it away. I want to know what she fears, so I can surround her with it." She finally unclasped the gargantuan emerald from her neck, its cold weight a familiar comfort. But tonight, it felt like a stone. She ran her thumb over its smooth, hard surface. "And the newspaper," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "Call Marcus Thorne at the consortium. Tell him I'm calling in my chit, all of them. I want every advertising dollar from every brand he represents, pulled from the Sentinel Post by morning. Then call Judge Albright. Tell him I need a temporary restraining order issued against Eleanor Vance and the paper, citing harassment and invasion of privacy. I want her legally gagged by sunrise." She placed the necklace on a marble pedestal. This was never about a furniture company. It was about perfection. It was about a flawless system. That girl, that waitress. She didn't just spill wine on me. She introduced a flaw into the system. And flaws, she murmured, looking at her own reflection in the dark glass, must be burned out until not even the ash remains. Her entire life had been a crusade against mediocrity, against sentiment, against the weakness of others. She had built an empire on a simple, brutal principle. The world was composed of assets and liabilities. People, companies, laws, they were all just variables in an equation of profit. For the first time, she had encountered a variable she couldn't quantify. A waitress who could quote obscure legislation. It was impossible. It was an anomaly. And Catherine Lancaster's world did not allow for anomalies. She would not rest until this one was corrected, erased, and forgotten. The coffee shop Arthur Pendleton chose for their meeting was the antithesis of Aurelia. It was a small, unassuming place in the West Village, with worn wooden floors and the rich smell of roasted coffee beans. It was a place for conversations, not pronouncements. When Eleanor arrived, he was already there, sitting at a small table in the back, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked less like a captain of industry and more like a retired professor. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed gently as she sat down. "They've bugged my phone and put a tail on me," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "My editor is about to be forced to kill the story." "Of course," Arthur said, taking a calm sip of his coffee. "It is the standard opening gambit, a show of overwhelming force to induce a swift surrender. It's what predators do. They puff up their chests and roar, hoping the prey will simply be paralyzed by fear." "It's working," Eleanor admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Frank is a good man, but he's just a man. The board will fold. The board is a collection of businessmen, my dear. They are not warriors. They understand risk and reward. Right now, Catherine represents maximum risk. We must simply change the equation." She slid the slim file across the table. It contained the meticulously documented summaries of the 7 other companies Catherine had dismantled using the same predatory model. "This is my only weapon left. It shows a pattern of criminal behavior." Arthur put on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses and studied the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each line. He was silent for several long minutes. "Good heavens," he murmured finally, looking up at her over the rims of his glasses. "This isn't just corporate raiding. This is a plague. She's been systematically targeting the last bastions of American craftsmanship, companies built on a handshake, run by families who thought their word was their bond." His eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of cold, aristocratic anger. She hasn't just been stealing their money. She has been mocking their values. He closed the file with a soft, final thud. "Then we shall not fight her on her terms. We will not engage in a war of attrition. We will not roar back. We will instead be very, very quiet." He pulled out an old fountain pen and a small, leather-bound address book. Catherine's power comes from new money. It is loud, aggressive, and requires constant validation. The people on her boards, the politicians she owns, they are loyal only to her checkbook. But there is an older power in this city, a power that operates on legacy, reputation, and mutual obligation. It is quiet, it is patient, and it does not take kindly to loud, disruptive people who threaten the stability of the ecosystem. He tapped his pen on a name. Alistair Finch, chairman of the board at United Metropolitan Bank. They hold Catherine's primary line of credit. Alistair's grandfather and my grandfather founded the city's first philharmonic orchestra together. His daughter is my goddaughter. He and I, we speak the same language. He made the call right there, in the quiet coffee shop. His voice was warm, collegial. He spoke of the weather, of a recent art auction, of his grandchildren. Then his tone shifted ever so slightly, acquiring a subtle note of gravity. "Alistair, a small matter of concern has been brought to my attention. A portfolio you're heavily invested in, tied to an entity called Phoenix Legacy Holdings. There's some talk in the club, concerns about its legal structure, something about new ERISA regulations. One hates to see the bank overexposed, especially with federal auditors being so zealous these days. No, nothing concrete. Just whispers. You know how these things are. It might be wise to review the file with a very fine-toothed comb, for the sake of the shareholders, of course." He listened for a moment, then smiled. "Excellent. My best to Helen." He hung up. "The first stone has been tossed into the pond," he said to Eleanor. "The ripples will reach the shore by lunchtime." He then made a second call, this one to a woman named Judge Marion Resident, a retired federal judge known for her ferocious intellect. He framed the issue as a fascinating hypothetical, an intellectual puzzle. By the end of the call, he had a verbal opinion on the illegality of Catherine's scheme that was so damning, it was practically a verdict. An opinion he would ensure found its way to the right inbox at the SEC anonymously. "You see," he said, placing his phone on the table. "No threats, no raised voices, just a conversation between friends, a quiet application of pressure on the load-bearing walls of her empire. Now, she is distracted. She is worried about her financing. She is wondering what the old guard is whispering about her, and while she is looking in our direction, The real blow will come from behind her. Amelia Vance had not slept in 2 days. After the debacle at Aurelia, Catherine had subjected her to a 40-minute tirade that had stripped every last ounce of her ambition and self-worth. She was now trapped, an accomplice to a crime she found morally repugnant, serving a woman she now actively feared. She sat in her sterile, glass-walled office, staring at the projections for the Blackwood & Sons liquidation. She saw the numbers, the profit margins, the elegant efficiency of the plan. But behind the numbers, she saw the faces of the artisans she had met during her due diligence visit. Men with sawdust in their hair and passion in their eyes, who spoke of wood grain as if it were poetry. Her ambition had always been a shield. It had protected her from the moral compromises, the small cruelties of the corporate world. But the shield was cracking. The venom of Catherine Lancaster had seeped through. That evening, as she was preparing to leave the office, an email arrived in her inbox. It was from an anonymous, encrypted address. There was no subject line, no text, just a single link. Her hand trembled as she clicked on it. It led to a 3-year-old article from the Sentinel Post. The byline was Eleanor Vance. It was an exposé of a different corporate raider who had been brought down by an internal whistleblower. The final paragraph detailed how the junior executive who came forward wasn't ruined, but was celebrated for his courage, and was now the COO of a major ethical investment fund. Amelia leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't blackmail, it was a life raft, a quiet, untraceable offer of a different path, a different future. A future where she wouldn't have to look at herself in the mirror with disgust every morning. For an hour, she sat in the deepening twilight of her office, the city lights beginning to glitter outside. Then, with a resolve that felt both terrifying and liberating, she slipped her security keycard into the mainframe server. She navigated to the encrypted files for Phoenix Legacy Holdings. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading the internal memos, the strategic outlines, the emails where Catherine explicitly detailed her intent to dissolve the Blackwood Pension Fund and absorb the surplus. It was all there. The smoking gun, the entire arsenal. She copied the files onto a nondescript flash drive, placed it in a plain brown envelope, and walked out of the building, not to her car, but to a public postbox blocks away. She didn't use a corporate messenger. She used a prepaid stamp. As the envelope dropped into the darkness of the box, she felt a profound sense of release. She had no idea what would happen to her career, to her life. But she knew, for the first time in a long time, that she would be able to sleep tonight. The final scene did not play out in a courtroom. It played out in the 34th floor boardroom of United Metropolitan Bank, a chamber of hushed power, panelled in dark, century-old mahogany. Catherine Lancaster had been summoned to an emergency review of her portfolio. She strode in 10 minutes late, an intentional display of dominance, her face a mask of bored contempt. She expected a room of frightened men she could easily steamroll. She did not expect to see Arthur Pendleton sitting at the far end of the long table, calmly stirring a cup of tea. His presence was a physical shock. He was a relic, a ghost from a world she had gleefully rendered obsolete. His being there was a fundamental violation of the new order. Alistair Finch, the bank's chairman, cleared his throat. "Catherine, thank you for coming. In light of new information that has come to our attention, information pertaining to the significant legal and reputational risks associated with your recent acquisition strategies, the board has unanimously voted to suspend your firm's line of credit, effective immediately. We are also calling in your outstanding short-term loans." The air went out of the room. It was a corporate death sentence. This is preposterous, Catherine snarled, her voice shaking with rage. On what grounds? Some libelous fantasy cooked up by a disgraced waitress? I will sue this bank into oblivion. No, Catherine, Arthur said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the room's history. This is not because of a waitress. This is because of your arrogance. You mistook tradition for weakness and silence for acquiescence. You operated under the delusion that the only rules that matter are the ones you write yourself. But there are older rules, rules of conduct, rules of honor. You have broken them all. He slid a newspaper across the polished table. It was the morning edition of the Sentinel Post, the ink still fresh. Eleanor's story was the front page, above the fold. The headline was stark, brutal, and simple. The Pension Pillager, Vanguard Titan. Catherine Lancaster's billion-dollar empire of ruin. Below it was Eleanor's byline, and next to it, a scanned image of the first page of an internal Phoenix Legacy memo, with Catherine's own furious signature at the bottom. The smoking gun, for all the world to see. Her editor, Frank, armed with the irrefutable proof from Amelia, and emboldened by the knowledge that Lancaster's financial bedrock was crumbling, had found his courage. He had run the story. Catherine stared at the headline, then at the memo. Her mind, a machine of pure calculation, finally stalled. The flaw in her system had not been burned out. It had replicated, metastasized, and consumed her from within. She looked from Alistair's cold, resolute face to Arthur's calm, almost pitying gaze. She saw no fear, no deference. For the first time in her adult life, she was in a room where her money was worthless and her power was an illusion. She had not just been outmaneuvered, she had been rendered obsolete. She opened her mouth to speak, to threaten, to roar, but no sound came out. She had been silenced. A few weeks later, on a crisp autumn evening, Eleanor Vance sat at table 4 in Aurelia. She wore a simple black dress, not a charcoal grey uniform. Harvey Dawson had seated her himself, his face a mask of flustered reverence. Across from her, Arthur Pendleton smiled as a waiter, the young art student Ben, poured them both a glass of champagne. To the most expensive glass of spilled wine in history, Arthur toasted, his eyes twinkling. Eleanor clinked her glass against his. The sound was soft, delicate. "It's not over," she said, looking around the hushed, gilded room. "She'll be tied up in litigation for a decade. The SEC has frozen her assets. Blackwood is safe, but she'll never go to prison." "Prison is a cage of steel and stone," Arthur replied softly. "Her punishment is far more precise. We have placed her in a cage of irrelevance. Her name is no longer a key that opens every door. It is a warning that closes them. She still has her penthouse, but she has lost her view. She can no longer see the world as her chessboard. For a woman like Catherine, that is a fate worse than death." He leaned forward. "The Pendleton Initiative for Journalistic Integrity is now fully endowed. Your office is ready. Your first 2 hires, both veteran reporters laid off from regional papers, have accepted their positions. You have no board of directors to answer to, no advertisers to placate, only a mandate, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable." Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude, so profound it was almost overwhelming. It was not just a victory. It was a beginning. As she looked around the room, her gaze fell upon the Gardenia suite. At the table sat another corporate titan, a younger, more aggressive version of Catherine Lancaster. He was talking animatedly to a young woman who looked remarkably like Amelia Vance had, bright, ambitious, and with a flicker of anxiety in her eyes, the predator and the protégé. The cycle, she realized, was endless. Her victory hadn't changed the world. It had not vanquished all the dragons. It had only saved one village, slain one beast. But as she looked at Arthur, and then at the keys to her new office that he'd placed on the table, she understood. Her job was not to win the war. It was to stand watch on the walls, to be the ghost in the room, the invisible observer, armed not with a wine bottle, but with the truth. And to be ready, always, for the next time a monster needed to be reminded that even the smallest insect, when dared, could learn to bite back.